Welcome back to Spitballin Cards. In today's video, we're going to be discussing the SGC acquisition very quickly from PSA. We're going to be discussing Fnatic's latest blunder and forgetting one-of-one rookie cards or labeling one-of-one rookie cards. And the main thing we want to talk about is going to be, how do we know we want to start collecting and PCing a new player? So on this episode, we have me, Scott, Ty, Jeff, and Chris. Thanks for hopping on, everybody. It's good to see you all. And I think we should start out by just asking the question, what do you think about PSA acquiring SGC, or PSA's parent company acquiring SGC? Ty, what do you think?
What do I think? I think there's probably, well, we know this. There's people who wanted to stick it to the man who is collectors and PSA by sending their money elsewhere to SGC. And there are people who really liked sending their cards there for that reason. You know, low cost to grade, quick turnaround times, very good customer service. And they liked all those things. And now they're part of collectors, and those people aren't very happy. They have a major dilemma. Many of those people don't want to send to BGS because they're maybe frustrated with them for different reasons. It doesn't leave many choices for a lot of people, depending. We know that CGC is strong in the TCG game, but in sports cards, they're not doing too much in volume. So that's one thing. But on the flip side of things, there's people who are speculating that maybe over time, with collectors' leadership, brand, operations, other things, that they could start trying to sell people on SGC as well, and that it could potentially close the gap. I did a video recently showing that many PSA 10 cards are selling for about 1.7 times what a Gem Mint SGC 10 sells for in the same card, which is wild in my opinion. And maybe that gap closes. I have a hard time seeing it widen. So I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. Some people are saying they think this is like the end of SGC. I don't believe that for a minute, but I guess it remains to be seen if there's any substantial change happening. By all accounts, they're saying nothing changes. This just, increases our network. So they've got a serious corner on the market now.
There's rumors they just bought SGC, so Fanatics couldn't buy SGC. I don't know if that's true, but that's the rumor. So like, hey, we'll buy you, but you just do whatever you want. We're not going to mess with you. Go for it. Great. That's everybody's happy. That could be the case, but I do think this does put PSA haters into a predicament, like you mentioned, Ty. They just literally would not grade with PSA and just graded SGC solely because of that. And it's not a lot of people, but it is some people, and maybe they're passionate. I'm not saying they're wrong, but they really only have BGS or CGC at this point. And so it's not a great situation. Me personally, I have zero reason now to grade with SGC, like maybe vintage. I will grade non-sport vintage with SGC, and they do a great job there. But outside of that, like I do not see a use case for them currently. Jeff, what do you think?
Yeah, well, I'm interested to see what's going to happen down the road. They've said they're going to keep both entities separate. I have a hard time seeing that lasting for the long term. I feel like they're going to fold them in somehow. The biggest surprise was the brief fake tweet that came out from Darren Ravel that was being passed around talking about how SGC 10s are going to be switched to PSA 10s and you can cash them in, and that led to a brief moment of panic in the hobby, because that would really screw things up. As Ty said, there's a huge price discrepancy and you can't just cross them over. So I don't think that's in their plans. And if it was, I think the uproar from that changed any plans for that. I wonder what SGC Pete's going to do, though, if he's going to just stay on there, or if he's going to make his move to get out and do his own thing. So I'll be interested to follow it. But as for now, I'm just going to keep subbing with PSA like I have been doing.
Pete's done a good job. I'll give him credit for what he's done with that brand over the last 4 years. He's done a really good job. Maybe 5 years. I don't know when he took over. But yeah, Chris, what's your final thoughts?
I have nothing different than what you guys think. This isn't really going to change anything I do, and I think we just have to wait and see how it all plays out. I do think the most likely scenario is what you just said, that I think PSA bought them to get ahead of Fanatics. I think that's the thing that makes the most sense, to kind of keep themselves totally in control of the grading sphere.
So what's more likely? Fanatics, right? Like, I don't think they're going to buy CGC, because CGC is its own very large, successful business in other branches of collectibles. They could partner with CGC if they wanted to, and like have an exclusive partnership. That could be a potential, maybe a new office somewhere. I don't know. Or they go for BGS, but I don't think that's likely. BGS seems like they just don't care anymore. which is unfortunate because I do like them still. But or they start their own business. Like, what do you think's the most likely? Are they going to start their own grading company, or are they going to stay completely out of it and just say that's a conflict of interest?
I mean, they should say it's a conflict of interest and stay the hell out of it. But I think buying BGS is probably the most likely move.
Yeah.
That would be interesting if they bought BGS. I
don't think they stand to lose a lot if they buy BGS, if I'm being totally honest. Like the floor versus ceiling, so to speak, is, you know, that's a company with a lot of brand goodwill baked into that name. And they've managed to completely not take advantage of that over the last 3 years. And there are so many opportunities. And that's like Michael Rubin's MO, is to like go in and take something that's broken. They bought PWCC, and there's things, you know, in the works with PWCC, and they had to go through some changes, and they're trying to restore that company back to being solvent. And so I think they could do the same thing with Beckett. And there's a lot of opportunity, and they've got the marketing engine that who knows.
Yeah, I think Fanatics wants to be a one-stop shop for all things hobby. So I would not be surprised if they made a move into the grading card, especially since it's such a high margin business. There's not a lot to do. So not a lot of expenses there. And I feel like if they would take over and like you said, put their marketing machine behind BGS, maybe it could rise from the ashes.
Yeah, just imagine the grading mistakes we could see if Fanatics were to take over Beckett. All the mislabels, all the mislabeling that would come out of there. It'd be really entertaining to watch.
I will say, if Fanatics bought BGS and just changed the grading scale, people would grade with BGS. I think a lot of us want BGS to win. I kind of do. I like BGS, even though they've not done anything to make me like them in the last 5 years. I still like them. But yeah, like you said, though, Chris, that leads us to our next topic, which is Fanatics just forgetting to do something extremely important and just saying, sorry, won't happen again. And then it happens again 6 months later. And what I'm referencing is going to be the missing first logo on the one-of-one first rookie card. So what this is Fanatics basically printed a few sheets, the very first sheets off the press. My understanding, the very first one of each player was given a specific one-of-one stamp on the back, and on the front it says first card, designating this is the first card made. And the issue is they did not include the stamp designating that it was the first card made, and they did include the one-of-one on the back. So if you bought a blaster box, there's a chance you pulled a one-of-one of Ellie De La Cruz and threw it away, or put it in a box, or gave it to the local Little League team or something, bought into breaks. There's a great chance that you didn't get your one-of-one, and it's just really unfortunate. So, Ty, what do you think of Fanatics quality control?
The thing I think is accountability. Like, I really, at times, here's what I'll give them credit for. They immediately have press releases. Topps does. They come out, they say, look, we screwed up. We own up to it. And we talked about that on our Cards on the Table segment that we do every week on the SCI channel. And Jeff, kind of got uncharacteristically worked up, talking about the fact that Panini never does that. Panini never comes out and owns up to anything. They just literally ignore it. At least Topps acknowledges it. And Topps then says, and here's what we're going to do about it. If you have it, send it to us. We'll stamp it. They had the missing redemption. They had all kinds of things. So they give you a pathway to resolution, maybe an imperfect one, but they actually own up to it. But I'd like another degree of accountability. I'd like him to be like, look, this is how this happened. We figured out how it happened, and this is how we're going to fix it. Or like when the internal communications memo or whatever didn't happen, and then their marketing materials went out and scared the crap out of all of us about Series 1 with no image variations, when in reality it was something even better, in my opinion, with the true photos and the golden mirror image variations, which was like, and they made the golden image with the gold back, which I thought was a nice touch, like a lot of cool things. And they just completely screwed it up. So that's another example. It's like, somebody come out and take some ownership of this and say, we actually looked at how this happened, and this is how we're going to fix it. We're kind of like running out of the 9 lives, so to speak. At a point, you're just going to be like, come on, guys, like it can't keep happening. And it seems like there might be something with the printing facility, which we know is shared between Panini and Topps. And so there's issues galore on both sides with both companies. I'd like to see how they're going to fix it at this point.
And I'm sure their issue is just the fact that there's not many printing facilities that can handle the capacity they're looking to print, right? And maybe the printing facility is really great and they just are printing whatever files are given them, and some random person just didn't include the image in the file. Like there's a great chance on the printing plate or whatever it's going to be, that's how it's like. I actually, when I was working in marketing, we would make in our design, the designers that I worked with would make the final version, send it to the printer. And if it was messed up on the actual design, it was our fault, not the printer.
Oh, yeah, sure.
So
Yeah.
I think we need to be a little bit critical of Topps when they do mess up, because we do praise them a lot, Fanatics a lot, but they do mess up. And it's one of those things where they have their biggest 3 products or 4 products since they've been doing sports cards have been screwed up with Bowman twice, right? Print double superfractors, and then not including short prints of key rookies. And now it's like they gotta step it up.
Yeah. Maybe Collectors is going to start a printing facility too.
I was just going to say, you would think that one of these, somebody, if printing is the issue, that one of these giant companies would invest their resources and money into their own printing company, which probably is not too far behind. I would think that would be if the printing is an issue. And if it's not, you would think that they would figure out how the communications seem to get screwed up every time. So yeah, it's just surprising that with such high profile products, just like Ty said, all their major ones over the past 12, 18 months have had significant issues. And this just adds to it.
Yeah,
I think you just gave us.
Because it's a cool
Sorry,
idea.
you go.
I like this idea of this Ellie De La Cruz stamp. This is the first one that came off the production line. I think it's a great idea. And it's just, I couldn't help but laugh when they just forgot to stamp the card. I mean, it's just something about it is just funny. Like, we're just doing 2 things. We're putting a 1 of 1 and a stamp, and they just did one of the 2 things and they didn't do it. I mean, sometimes you just have to chuckle. I don't know, but how many cards are in Series 1? Is it 330?
350.
Yeah, is it 350?
Okay, I think we can assume that like 180 are gone forever. Like Sean Murphy's 1 of 1 first production is gone. Like no one's gonna find it. Like all the common players, they're long gone. No one's going through these stacks of cards. But somewhere someone has the Ellie De La Cruz, right? That looks the same and has a 1 of 1 stamp on the back. Like that one should be found. Like the big names will probably be found. But it's just a shame. It's really too bad.
The breakers are gonna have to go through a lot of boxes of commons because as we mentioned, the front just looks like a typical base card. We don't know, we were discussing this earlier, if they showed up in the hits part of a pack or just stuck in there with the regular base cards. So, and even if they were in the hits part, people probably would just assume it was a mistake unless they look at the back, which
because apparently the Ohtani and the Soto SSSP image variations are just like, they're not turned around, they're just like in a random part of the pack. They're not in the hit part of the pack. I think there's I like it too. I think there's probably a lot of people who don't. I have to go back and find my Series 1 box. Like I have all the cards in a box and make sure I didn't hit one of those because I probably wouldn't have noticed. But yeah,
Kyle,
that just makes me wonder about these ones.
You would have pulled out a Shohei Ohtani card, right? You don't just go buy a Shohei Ohtani, right? If you're opening packs, like you gotta pull the Ohtani out.
Yeah, like what's the saying? Any trout's a good trout. So any Ohtani.
Whenever I'm opening cards with my dad, he hates that. It's like, why did you pass that Jose Altuve? And it's like, well, I mean, like I was a Hall of Famer, but like it's not worth anything, Dad. And he's like, back when I collected, and that's hard for him to understand. So you would be surprised when people just skip over it. But speaking of breakers having to go back through boxes, how many breakers do you think are, not to assume the worst, but just going to keep the cards if they find them, 1, or even if they look, they just still don't see it because it's just a small little foil in the bottom. So it's a tough situation to be in. But all right, I think that wraps us up. I think we can just say it's unfortunate. Luckily, it wasn't like the Platinum 1 of 1. I think that would have been worse, in my opinion, if they messed that up because that's more of a legacy parallel. But the last thing that we want to discuss, it was actually a viewer question, and they essentially asked, how do you approach collecting a new player? At what point do you decide I want to collect this player? And how do you go about buying that player? Like, where do you start? What's your goal? What's your objective? In case you want to expand the PC that you currently have. Jeff, what do you do? I know you've been back for a few years in the hobby. Like, what do you do when you're looking to get into a new player?
Well, it's changed since I've been back in. When I first got back in, my process was, is he a player on my favorite team? Great. He's an exciting young player. looking for some prospects. And then since then I've learned that that's not the best way for me to collect. So I am now more careful with starting a PC. I wait until a player is a little bit more established. And you could see this paying dividends in some ways, because then you get to miss out on players that won't be worth anything to the hobby and may not be important to you personally. But it also comes at a cost. Like for instance, Shohei Ohtani, I did not want to collect him when he first came over because he was so expensive. He was way out of my price range. And then he got hurt and his prices came down. But I thought, well, I don't know. Is he really going to ever live up to what his capabilities were? Yeah. So I wanted to wait to see how he could play. And I didn't even start. I don't think I bought my first Ohtani card until after he won his first MVP. So I probably cost myself some there. But I feel like now when I start a new PC of a player, the player has proven himself to me that they're going to be around at least for the mid to long term.
I think it's a great approach. What about you, Chris? What do you do?
All right. So I would say there's two players. Usually it's a Braves player is who I'm going to PC, but there's two guys that are sort of unrelated to teams I root for that I do actively PC, and they're for very different reasons. The first one is Devers, who plays for the Red Sox, obviously. And I do really, really like him. But in the spring of 2021, I was not necessarily a huge Devers fan. He wasn't really on my radar. But I traded for him in a dynasty fantasy league.
Yes.
And as soon as I was talking to this other owner about he wanted to trade a hitter for a pitcher, we made the deal. And I was looking at his players and I'm like, this Devers guy is really, really young. And he's put up some amazing numbers. And I started to be like, well, I acquired him. And I'm like, okay, he's going to be with me for a while. I should look at his cards. And they were really cheap. So I ended up buying a couple. And then he started, continuing to play well. And I do like the Red Sox. I'm like, oh, wow. I started looking at his other highlights. He hit that great home run off Chapman. I'm like, I really like this guy. And his stuff hadn't really gone up. So I just sort of kept finding cool Devers cards that I liked. And really haven't stopped in the 3 years since then. And he is still on my team. Because once you start a PC of a player, you can't trade him off your fantasy team. Now we're sort of
and you have to draft him every year if it's not a dynasty league.
I try. I always try.
That's awesome. Ty, how do you do it?
Well, I think what both Jeff and Chris are talking about is connection. There has to be a connection to the player. And I love the fantasy angle. That's actually becoming like a really big thing. I'm hearing it more and more with people. It's really big in football, which is obviously like the big fantasy sport. Like football is massive with fantasy sports. And I'm hearing more and more people say that they like going after guys that won them championships and that they have fond memories of being the greatest. Even for like a year or two, they were just so good in fantasy that they want to go after them. And I'll give a shout out to my buddy John, who has a dynasty baseball league, and he finally won it this last year. And so he wanted to go out and get one like meaningful card of all the guys on his roster. And nothing too crazy, but he's like, I want to like immortalize this fantasy season by getting a card of these guys and have a cool one. And so that's the connection element to it. I obviously have a really big Andre Drummond collection, which is basketball. And that was because when I came back into the hobby, I was looking for a connection point to my favorite basketball team, the Pistons, and looking at that team from the 2010s and going, he's like the only consistent, the only constant over that period. And his cards were dirt cheap. So from a pure PC, just having fun perspective, that was great. Now I can say years later, I think I let a little bit of like collecting ego get to me to the point of like feeling obligated to buy cards that I didn't actually want. And now I have some like that because I'm like, I just have this really cool opportunity, or reality, maybe even is the better term, to have the best collection literally in the world of a player. And that's sort of a cool thing. And so every time I saw really a one of one or whatever, I'm like, I got to buy it because I got to have it because I'm just racking up this one of one total. And now I'm at the point where my collecting priorities have shifted. And so I'm starting to look at some of those cards saying, I'm probably going to send some of these to ComC. I'm probably going to consign some of them or sell them to Cards HQ and kind of put those funds back into something else. The one thing I'll say about a team, like you guys mentioned that, the Brewers and the Braves, the Tigers have sucked so bad. Like over the last decade, it's been frustrating. And a lot of the teams that I root for across all the sports, the players don't stick around. Like they move on. And then even more frustratingly, like with the Pistons and the Lions, they'll go play for another team and have like a really good season. And that's very like disenchanting. That's very frustrating as a collector. And all of a sudden I'm like, now I've got like these 5 cards that I massively overpaid for because they were hyped rookies at the time. The guy does nothing, and now I've got to sell them because I'm just ticked off that he never played for the Lions or played for the Tigers or played for the Pistons well. So I'm like Jeff, settling into who's somebody who's sort of established, who I can go to. I found a connection to John Smoltz because his story, it's like similar trajectories. He grew up in Michigan. He was going to go to Michigan State. I'm a Michigan State fan. Then he got drafted by the Tigers, but then he got traded to the Braves, never plays for the Tigers. I'm a transplant from Michigan down and now like de facto Braves fan in the NL. There's just kind of a cool thing there. And I love pitchers and always enjoyed watching Smoltz pitch. So I think it's about finding that connection point. I know that's a lot, but this is something I'm really passionate about and I've spent a lot of time with. And there's a lot of ways people can find that connection to a player.
You and Smoltz have one other thing in common, but I'm too nice to point it out.
Just very, very handsome men.
Yes, that's exactly it. Yep, you got it. Nailed it.
Yeah. Talking too much?
No.
Great analysis. Great analysis we have in common.
Deep analysis.
So for me, when I'm looking to collect a player, right, the most important thing you need to do, and this is kind of what Chris said, is watch that player. Because sometimes when you watch a player, you learn to like a player, and then you convince yourself about that player. And then if you can do that, that's when you buy more and more and more. So that's something that I've done. And that's how I kind of got hooked on Mookie. I bought Mookie at first because I thought he was too cheap in like 2019 or 2018 or whatever it was. I just felt like he was too cheap. I didn't really watch the Red Sox because the Rockies were pretty good in that era. So I watched them every night. And then after I bought his cards, I watched him every game. I'm like, oh, wow, he is really good. And then that's kind of when I became a bigger collector of his cards. And the same thing can be said about Mike Trout and even Juan Soto for me. There's also sometimes just a feeling you have about a player. They get you excited and you enjoy watching them, whether when they come up and make their debut. If you want to even be riskier, if you like watching prospects in minor league games, you can take that one step further and watch minor league games and see if any player to you looks like they could translate at the big league level, and you can speculate on them. And once you have some, stake invested in them, when they do debut and if they do well, it makes you a much more, rooting for them type collector than if you just bought when they debut.
It's like becoming a fan of a band that you saw play at your local venue and then they make it big time.
Absolutely.
Like, all right. I've been with them from the start.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, I would just say watch them. Like, there's people who will say, well, man, I think Bryce Harper's just more fun than Mookie Betts. And maybe you can say that's true, but it's like, well, you watch Bryce Harper every day. Do you watch Mookie Betts ever? And they're like, no. Okay, well, if you watch Mookie Betts every day and not Bryce Harper, you might say the opposite. So it's one of those things. Just watch the players, see if they resonate with you. And if they do, that's when I would jump. Also, try not to buy into the hype too much. Even for good players, I've lost money on good players because there are very obvious hype cycles that you can just avoid if you're smart. So that's my only advice is just be careful if you're spending big money on a Bowman Chrome Gold or something.
Trey Turner comes to mind for me.
Did that happen?
Flash and hype. Well, I just like his game, and he is fun to watch, or was when he could actually hit. But he's like a guy. I don't know what he comes to mind over this last year. There was so much hype between the World Baseball Classic, him trading teams, and just the slides, the smooth slides into home, and all that stuff. It's like he's like the ultimate guy. Where I was like, this guy's not going to be a Hall of Famer. Don't get sucked into the hype. Wait, get a cool card of him later when it's a fraction of the price if you really want one.
Yeah. Or you can take a different approach and just pick someone random that you love and just buy their cards and just enjoy loving that one player, even if they never gain value. That is kind of fun to have a PC like that. So,
so there was another guy that Jeff and I have actually recently started actively PCing more so than before, but it's sort of Devers adjacent. But Garett Cole is a pitcher that I always thought was good. But I never really got into buying his cards. And then he signed with the Yankees, so I'm just like, I lost interest. But in July of 2022, he said one thing at a press conference, and I was like, I like this guy, I like him a lot, and we're gonna go buy his cards. Rafael Devers had just hit, his 8th career home run off of Garett Cole. For whatever reason, he just owns him. And Cole said in his post-game press conference, so the reporters asked him about it, and he's like, look, I'm open to suggestions. I don't know how to get this guy out. The actual phrase was, I'm open to suggestions. And everyone laughed. And I was like, oh my God, I love this guy. The idea that you can be self-deprecating in that situation, immediately became a big fan of Garett Cole, and Jeff and I started looking for his stuff. Sometimes that's all it takes.
A few words. Little did we know, one sentence could shift Chris's collecting priorities.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because that sentence then makes you look a little deeper into it, and we started talking about pitchers, and pitchers aren't very collected in the hobby, so even their best cards are priced lower than a lot of mid-tier hitters, you might say. And we just started looking at the pitchers who have achieved the level that Garett Cole has, and there's just not a lot in baseball right now. We've got the older generation that's kind of timing themselves out. The Verlander, Scherzer, Kershaw, Greinke generation. And then there's a big gap between them and Spencer Strider and his 4 crazy pitches and quads. So I think Garett Cole really has a chance to make a lasting impression. So the fact that he's a fun guy, seems pretty cool. Prices are lower compared to other Hall of Fame trajectory players of his era. Yeah, it seems like worthwhile.
They've gained a lot in the last 6 months. They've gained a lot of value. Garett Cole's cards. It's tough, but I do agree. Like realistically, it's Spencer Strider's a name. Yuri Perez is a name. Maybe Zach Gallen. Like how many young guys do we really believe could have a Hall of Fame path? And what is the Hall of Fame path in modern pitching going to be looking like? Because you still have to pick generational talent. Like we can't just stop having pitchers in the Hall of Fame. Maybe you can, but it's tough. It's really tough with the way they're managed nowadays. So I think that's a great way to point it out, is just which players are doing things others aren't, which is obvious. But if you can identify that slightly earlier than others, it makes it really fun to snag some big cards and root for them. So
I do think you want to ask yourself too, like if you're going to go heavy into a player, just ask yourself if you're the kind of person who would care, how much you care about who that person is as a person versus like just watching them as an athlete. Because sometimes you find out things, and it might not be to the extent of like a Wander Franco type thing where you're just like, oh gosh, this is really bad. Nobody could have seen that coming and whatever. But just, that's part of that connection to an athlete. Like they're just people. That's how I always view athletes. They're people. But some of them are better human beings than others, or just maybe have more in common with you than other people might. And so if you become like a fan of somebody, you never know. What if you get the chance to meet this person someday and you're like, actually, I don't know if I want to meet this guy. Like, some athletes are kind of like that too. So something to keep in mind, just like if there's some other connection bigger than just what they're doing on the field, so to speak.
Mike Trout kind of comes to mind there. Like he's a good person off the field. You don't have to worry about that part at all about his game. I remember Julio Urias. He was 26 years old. He's out of baseball forever now, I would say. And he actually got caught with domestic abuse. And he had to take like a big class on, anger management and not being a domestic abuser. And then a few years later, he was pitching well with the Dodgers, and people are like, man, check buy his cards. And that's what you're saying, Ty's like, do you want to collect his cards? People make mistakes, yes. But I mean, like, do you want to put stock into that person as a person? Because it can be challenging. So here's a question for you then. Let's say we've established what players we like. What cards do we buy? How do you approach cards? Do you just go buy a bunch of random things on eBay? Do you take a thoughtful approach and buy flagship PSA 10s? Like what do you do? Do you go straight for the Bowman Chrome? How do you approach that to have like risk and reward plus fun in buying their cards? Jeff, what do you do?
Well, I think especially now in this environment, you got to look for rarity and scarcity because there's so many cards out there, especially of players that have made their debut in the last, I'd say 4 or 5 years. You really want to be sure that you're going to get a card, especially if you're putting substantial amount of money into it that has a chance to hold its value. Even if it doesn't increase, at least it might hold its value. So yeah, typically I'd look at their first Bowman autographs, and especially if you can get a parallel, look at the parallels. And it's all price dependent. There's a lot of players that I would have loved to collect, like Julio Rodriguez, but he was so expensive and is still so expensive. It's hard for me to justify investing in him. But so for me, if I can't find those rare cards of the player, maybe a flagship black parallel or a Topps gold chrome parallel, if I can't afford those or can't go after those, then I might not collect the player. So that for me, I try to look for those cards first. And if that's out of my range, then typically I just stay away from them.
I actually agree with you 100% there. There's times where I want to buy someone. Like Corbin Carroll comes to mind right now. I actually really like him. I really like his game, but his shoulder worries me like crazy. And on top of that, his cards aren't cheap. But he's a player where I like to think of players are like really impacting, like, wow, they could be something special. And it's just a little bit too risky for me and too expensive for me compared to what else I could buy of other players. So you got to balance that too. Mm-hmm. But I think at the end of the day, it's just if that player excites you, then maybe you buy a little bit at a time. But Chris, do you have a different approach or do you agree with Jeff?
Usually I agree. When in doubt, I agree with Jeff. But I'll use another player as an example. Manny Machado is a guy that neither Jeff nor I had any interest in until I want to say it was in the 2022 season. Jeff, correct me if I'm wrong here. When Tatis almost got thrown out of a game, he was arguing a called strike and like had to be dragged away from the umpire. And then Machado just let him have it in the dugout and said, like, we need you on the field. You can't get thrown out. Like, you've got to get your shit together and act like an adult. Like, in his face, in front of the cameras, everyone could see it. Jeff and I like saw the highlight and we were like, Machado, we think it made us like Machado. Like, it's possible he's turned a corner. He's no longer like the immature kind of dirty-ish player that he used to be. Like, maybe this is a new Machado. So what did we do? The first thing I look for is what super short prints does Manny Machado have? And we were very fortunate that he has a rookie in 2013 Topps Update. He has like a black jersey. It's this really cool horizontal shot of him like throwing a ball kind of like fully extended. Like, it's an amazing card and it's super, super rare. So that was just perfectly into Jeff and my wheelhouse. So I think that sort of helped us sort of engage in Machado, even more. And then we looked at his Bowman Chrome autos and we're like, oh, these are going to be cheap because people don't like Machado, but they were not cheap. So we don't have one of those, but that rookie SSP is awesome. I love that card. I'm glad we were able to track one down. But that's always going to be the first thing that I look for.
Well, you guys have like sort of carved out a lane for yourself, like a player agnostic collecting niche. You know what types of cards you like, what types, and for you, it's sort of a hybrid. This is not unique to you at all. Like, I think this is how a lot of people are. It's sort of a hybrid of what can I enjoy going after and obtaining and collecting while also ensuring it's going to retain some value, hopefully long-term. Not everybody does that. Some people just, what they call themselves like pure collectors, and they don't care. They're like, I don't care if this card goes to zero. I've got to have it. I don't think anybody really thinks that way, but some people will say that. Yeah. But you know what your identity is regardless of the player in a sense. And you're going after Bowman Chrome, you're going after SSPs, you're going after certain parallels. And so that makes focus, I think, a lot easier for you when you can finally like zoom in on a player to know what you want to go after. A lot of people collect stuff too in a, like really from a collecting perspective in a lower price point, and they're just like to go after what they think looks cool for a player. And sometimes if you're doing that for a more obscure player, let's say you decided you wanted to collect Fernando Rodney, and you just wanted to go after him because you loved that he played for like 60% of the teams in MLB. And, like I'm sure somebody out there collects Fernando Rodney, and then his cards aren't very expensive in general. So maybe they're just kind of, I call it Pokemon syndrome. Like, you got to catch them all. They're just going after, this one looks cool. This looks cool. This looks cool. Those are all the people that I'm seeing in Cards HQ every day. Just dollar box, like going through. They love that. And so I don't want to like diminish that kind of like collector mindset too. There's a lot of people who just really like to have a lot of cool looking cards, and that's a very viable way of collecting a new player too, if you're into that.
Ty, is there a Fernando Rodney shooting an arrow like Stadium Club card with an auto?
Oh, there has to be.
Like, there has to be, but I don't know if there is.
I doubt it.
But if you're going to collect Fernando Rodney and that card exists, that's like the number one card you have to buy.
I don't know.
But Garett Cole fit right into our wheelhouse too, because he not only has a Topps flagship SSP rookie, he also has a Topps Chrome 2013 SSP rookie. And I think one of the reasons Jeff and I sort of gravitated to that set and the 12 and 14 is players we like and we like to collect have cards in there. It sort of made it.
Yeah, and I think something that Ty mentioned too about,
Well, that's pretty dope.
Not an SP, but there is 2013 top flagship.
Look at $2.49. I'm gonna smash the bin on that bad boy.
Smash it and go get it signed.
That's awesome.
Something that Ty mentioned about focus, and that also changes your focus on what your collection is or what you want it to be. And I know for Chris and I too, the cards that we collect together, that focus took a long time, and we soon realized that we were going a little bit too much after everything. So we tried to say, well, what do we really like? What is the most important to us? And how does that correspond with what we think will hold value in the future? And where we can find those 2 points that meet, those are the cards we're going to go after.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're hitting on something really important, which is in order for your cards to retain value, it doesn't matter what you think, it matters what other people think of your cards. It literally does. Like, that's how they retain value. Demand. Somebody else has to want the card at the end of the day, if you ever decide that you're going to sell it, or your kids are going to sell it, or whatever. So if you can sort of look at the whole hobby paradigm, the baseball collecting paradigm, and then see these are the ones that sort of, it's a group thing type of dynamic, but it's okay. And there's some reasons for it. Okay, now I can find like specific lanes within this to go after that. When you said the Fernando Rodney thing, it made me think of maybe Topps next innovation. I was thinking of Edwin Diaz, right?
The Mets folder? Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know why I was second guessing his name suddenly, but you know, the trumpet like coming out on the field, like that shot with the lights at night coming out, you know, running out onto the field. And if Topps put a little like audio player inside the card, you had that moment. That's it. Well, this is the next innovation, Topps. It'd have to be good quality audio, though, not something technical.
Audio cards, scratch and sniff cards.
Audio cards. You know, you pull it out. And once it's exposed to light, it starts playing the music.
But yeah, I think it's a great place to stop. I think we discussed that a lot. Let us know in the comments down below if you have any other input on how you start collecting these new players and what your approach is. And other than that, we will see you in the next video.